Welcome to the Football Chris Show, aka the FCS. That's because my name fits conveniently in the initials. On this show, I cover whatever seems to be the hottest topic around the FCS this week. I'm also usually joined by some incredible guests and some of the biggest brains in the FCS. Before the show starts, I just want to say I appreciate your support, whether it be on YouTube or whether you listen to it on the go. Without further ado, I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome back to the FCS, aka the Football Chris Show, because my name fits conveniently in the middle. We got a fun one for you guys today. So we're gearing up for a new season. We got some new teams in, some teams leaving. And I think it's a good time to kind of review where the FCS and where it stands. It's a show I've been trying to bring to you guys for a while. We're going to cover who the blue bloods of the FCS are. And for that, I've been working on it for a while, but I couldn't think of anyone better to bring in than Zach McKinnell of the Blue Bloods podcast. Zach, how are you doing today?
Hey, man, I'm doing good. I appreciate you having me, man. Definitely a big deal to be on here with you, man.
Yeah, no, it was funny because, like I said, I've been working on this episode for so long, basically since last season, and I've had a couple different host ideas, and then I was just sitting there listening to you on Sam Herder's FCS Football Talk, like last week, 2 weeks ago, and I'm like, man, because I've been following you guys, I'm like, that's the obvious invite. Why haven't I thought of that yet? So I'm just glad. Thank you for going on Sam's podcast and then giving me the idea to invite you on this podcast and coming on. But so what we're going to cover today for everybody is kind of, I got this idea about the bowl game season. There's this guy who basically broke down the top blue blood programs in the FBS. Your Texas's, your Alabama's, your USC's. Basically all the people that are joining these super conferences. So if you're interested in all that stuff, we got conference realignment pods out about everywhere. But today with Zach, I kind of want to cover at the FCS level, who are our blue bloods? We're going to cover, people all time. So, as you can probably tell by the background, Georgia Southern, for example, is going to be involved. Then we're also going to cover current. So, maybe your team, now that we've lost some of these historic programs, is in it. And we're going to kind of cover all of that. So the first thing we got to kind of figure out, Zach, in your mind, what is a blue blood?
I feel like my criteria is a little bit more stringent because we actually did an episode back when we were an FBS podcast about who the blue blood programs were in FBS. And, I don't think for me, I don't think there should ever be really more than 5 unless someone just comes out of nowhere. You look like someone coming in and doing what North Dakota State does, because there's people who would argue North Dakota State's not a blue blood just because they haven't done it long enough, which I think is a weird argument. Really and truly, when you look at what, listen, I don't care if they've been in FCS for 5 years, what they've done is impressive. But for me, you have to dominate your conference over an extended amount of time. Like you're talking, when I look at the programs that I was making my list, they have 10, 15 conference championships over so many years. They've won back-to-back conference championships, some 3, 4, 5 in a row. And so you have to be undisputably the most dominant team in your conference over whatever period of time that you're on top of the college football. Also, you have to win playoff games. Deep playoff runs are important. You can't, it's all great. When I look at someone like a Grambling State, where the brand itself might be a blue blood, they've won a lot of conference championships, but every time they get into the playoffs, they get backhanded by teams that really and truly also don't make super deep playoff runs. And so I think you have to make some fine distinctions. If you're not consistently getting to the semifinals, making national championship appearances, things like that, I really think it takes away from your ability to be a blue blood program. And also for me, this is probably where I set myself apart from some people. To be a true blue blood, you have to at least win a national championship during your run. I don't think getting there is good enough. You look at a team where I think they might be an honorable mention in Eastern, or not at Eastern Washington, but I'm trying to think who I'm thinking of a national championship appearance that haven't won it, but there's a few teams that have been to some and haven't won it. And so if you get to a national championship, that's all great. You can be a great all-time program. You can't be a blue blood unless you've hosted the hardware in January. And so for me, I think those would be my top 3 criteria. Also, if you want to look off the field, you got to be putting people into the NFL, and they have to be successful as well. I think that's what makes some of the top FBS programs blue blood programs. As you see the Alabama, the Ohio States, they're having a bunch of first round picks that go on to be Hall of Famers and go on to be superstars in the NFL. And the FCS is a little bit more difficult, but when you look at the top, the North Dakota States, 3 quarterbacks right now, going to the NFL, multiple top first round picks. You look at Christian Watson continuing, Cordell Volson. When you look at this year's recruiting class, the top programs in FCS are dominating that. You have to have that same type of success. So those would be some of my criteria just for myself.
I agree. And it was funny when I was doing this because, and I'll show the graphic that gave the idea here when we kind of talk about basically, everything here that goes into it. But the article that kind of sparked it, he included 8 blue bloods at the FBS level. And when I was running that by originally, the rest of the FCS Fans Nation guys, I was like, what do you guys think? Is 8 too many? Is 8 too little? And then Kyler's basically like, you need to find basically the cutoff of who's won a national title. And that is where it should be. And it's funny you said that, 'cause we didn't do a lot of prep pre-show, but 5 is the number that I cut, saying that basically the top 5 programs all time and currently are going to be what I'm going to label, at least as my blue bloods. Obviously, we're going to encourage people to comment down below and share, Facebook tweet at us what their, blue blood top 5s, top 25s are all time. But for the sake of my argument and the criteria I used, I came down to 5. And even with that, like you said, there's a team that they have an appearance, but they don't have a title. And that's just something that's so wonky with the FCS is you do have Boise State that won a title, but weren't really in the FCS that long. And then bounced right when they started to have success. You have an Idaho State that's one of the first programs to ever win one. But winning one back in 81 or 82, does that qualify you to be a blue blood today when you've fallen out of favor so much? And when I was researching this, I did do a lot of following the FBS conversation on blue bloods. I remember people talking Florida State, they came on in kind of the 90s, and does that make them a blue blood? Miami, they were good for a period, but they haven't been good recently, and they weren't really good before that period. And you kind of got into perspective where there are these programs that we know, your Miamis, your Florida States, your Floridas, but do they even qualify as blue bloods at the FBS level? So I guess when we're going through this and people are oh, how was my team? I don't know, I'm picking on a team and I don't have my list out, but in Eastern Washington, be how are we not, a blue blood? It's look, from about 2009, when you put that red turf on, you guys have been extremely good. But are we rewarding 11, 12-ish years of history now with being a blue blood of the sport all time? Where, in North Dakota State, you could say the same argument. However, they've got multiple national titles.
I feel like they're the asterisk. They're the asterisk at the bottom of the page that was listen, do not use this criteria for anybody else. There's nobody even on that level right now. So I feel like it's even weird. I feel like they're in their own conversation in terms of this.
Yep. And so so with that, I think it's funny. We both kind of agree it's going to be about 5. The whole thing, let's see if I can share this real quick. Here we have the tweet that kind of sparked it all here for me. And what you can tell is he brings up, here's your top 5 at the FBS level: Alabama, Michigan, Nebraska, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Oklahoma, Texas, USC. Here's his little graph on kind of how he did the weighting, right? A lot of it is your ranking in the AP. How many times you've been ranked number 1? And you can see all the different weightings. Having people go to conference championships, are consensus All-Americans, the NFL draft, first-round picks in the draft, just your winning percentage all time, how many times you've won the national championship game, how many Heisman winners, how many bowl game wins you've been to, how many New Year's Six games, and how many of the college football playoff, your appearance and stuff is. So I was looking at that. I'm that's a pretty good, in my opinion, ranking kind of what would be weighted into an FBS champion. And you kind of covered it on the FCS side. So we're saying probably playoff success is 1.
Yeah.
National title, obviously, we even said that almost might be criteria to cut yourself off from not being a blue blood. And then for that, I also said all-time winning percentage, I think, is important. I also think having Buck Buchanan, Jerry Rice, and Walter Payton winners, in my opinion, were important things. And then also, people that have been drafted. So those are kind of some of the criteria I was looking at when I was making my list. Is there anything you can think of that I might have missed that you think is important when determining this?
I think we have the same criteria. The only thing I put a little bit of weight into winning your conference too, especially when you look at some of the top conferences. It's really hard to dominate the MVFC, the Big Sky, even the SoCon back in the mid 2000s was
Yeah,
not a joke. I mean that conference had multiple teams that were national title contenders. So I think winning your conference and dominating your conference over other good teams is really important. Now, you can make mention like how are we going to weight it based on strength because winning the Pioneer versus winning the MVFC is probably not the same. But for me, looking at this list, a lot of the teams come from those quote unquote, I think you can even call them blue blood conferences. And so if you can go out there and win the MVFC over, North Dakota State, doing it over South Dakota State, doing it over Northern Iowa, Youngstown State, the list goes on and on. That to me carries a lot of weight as well.
I do. That is probably something I should look at. I think when I was going through it, the issue was like conferences have changed, and then like
Oh
am I
yeah.
rewarding the NEC and the Ivy? But that was the whole thing, and maybe at some point I'll do a 2.0 where like take feedback from this episode. But then I'm looking. I actually pulled up my list now how I did it all, and I had postseason. I also included postseason wins, how many times you made the postseason, semifinal appearances, and then obviously national titles. Because I do think there's something to be said about like if you're like a South Dakota State and you have or at least recently consistently started to make like semifinals, that should be rewarded. Or, Eastern at one point had been to a ton of semifinals, something that should be rewarded. So I decided to also include that in my stuff. Obviously, the heaviest weighting being winning a title, and then semifinal second. But yeah, that's kind of how I ended up making a little bit of my list. But with that, I ended up ranking it kind of the top 25 programs of all time, and then I have the Blue Bloods. Um, I know you don't really know this yet, but I'm just kind of off the top of your head. I want to hear you kind of just riff. Who do you kind of think, if you're thinking top 25 programs that have ever stepped foot in the FCS in terms of results at the FCS level? I mean, who are some of your guesses? And maybe we'll start with we'll save your top five because I do
Okay.
think those will be our Blue Bloods. But who do you think maybe round out 6 through 25?
I got a feeling I know they didn't have a lot of playoff success. I feel like FAMU somewhere in there because they had some dominant runs back in the day. Because I mean, they won the first FCS national title ever. They were running through. I believe they were in the CIA, the CIAC at one point. They went to the MEAC and had a big run. In the late '90s, they made a run to I believe the semifinals in like '99. Fell up just short against I believe Youngstown. So I think FAMU's probably in there. Montana State is probably somewhere in there. I don't know exactly where they would fall. I would imagine Eastern Washington. I think an overlooked one are the two programs of Eastern Kentucky and Furman too. I think both of those programs are extremely underrated. Both have won an FCS national title, and both have, in my opinion, I did a little bit of research, dominated their conferences. 14 SoCon conference titles for Furman. Eastern Kentucky has 15 OVC conference titles since their time in the FCS. So I think those programs would be in there, and I think Delaware is probably going to be near the top, but I don't think I doubt that they would probably make your top five right now off the top of my head.
Yeah, so you did hit a couple of the surprise ones. Who do you think the top five though are all time? Maybe go 5-1 or 1-5.
So for my all time, I actually have four teams in mind. I cut it off at four. I think there's a I would call them a like a borderline team. I think that borderline team is Montana. I think potentially you could make an argument that Montana belongs there. Two national titles in two different decades. Too, I believe it was '95 and the early 2000s. They won the other one, but I would say four would probably be Appalachian State. They had a dominant run in the mid 2000s, won three straight FCS national titles, multiple SoCon championships, which was a extremely strong conference at the time. I think you would probably have to have Georgia Southern, even though they're not in the FCS anymore all time, and they six national championships
Yeah,
overall, 10 SoCon championships. Youngstown State has to be in there with four national titles. And then I think the other one would have to be North Dakota State. I think we both agree they have to be in the conversation. Nine national championships, double digit conference championships in the MVFC, which has become the premier conference in all of FCS football. So I would say my five, if I had to guess, would be Montana, App State, North Dakota State, Youngstown State, and Georgia Southern.
all right. Based on my statistics here, you're pretty dang close to what I ended up getting based on my weightings. I had North Dakota State 1, which I do think will shock some people just because Georgia Southern had that longer history. So like when I was doing the weighting, I was like, yeah, I feel like I'm going to run into problems with this ranking because people are going to be like, oh, how is Georgia Southern ahead of North Dakota State? They have less titles. I'm like, yeah, but they did it over a
Mhm.
longer period of time. They have more postseason appearances, most postseason wins, more, like more of that stuff. That just goes to show how dominant North Dakota State has been, to the fact
Yeah.
where they absolutely smoked the field. I mean, if I'm looking at my rankings here, I have them. Oh gosh, they are actually, it was pretty close. They had 229.5 total points, and Georgia Southern had 221. So they are significant. The next would be Montana at 3, which only had 204. So it goes to show Georgia Southern was there. Honestly, this last national title by North Dakota State might be what put them over Georgia Southern in my all-time Blue Bloods list. Then you have the App State, and then, like you said, Youngstown, I think, is a sneaky one that a lot of people probably did
Mhm.
forget about. And I'm glad you kind of hit it too, because that is like all time. They are a program that used to be good. They have the Tressel years, and even recently have made a national title in the 2010s. So it is a program that maybe's lost a little bit of its luster. If you were comparing it to like an FBS equivalent, maybe almost like a USC, where like they kind of had, I guess USC won one, right? But I'm
Yeah.
thinking like they lose one in 05 to Texas, but hadn't really won anything recently before that. But you can't forget what they did in the past, and the fact that they usually are one of the top contenders in the Missouri Valley. They're usually right there on that playoff bubble. They can give teams like NDSU, South Dakota State, North Dakota, the teams that are currently kind of Missouri State, currently running the conference. Um, all time, you can admit that Northern Iowa, they don't want to run into these guys. And it is funny. You're like Eastern Kentucky comes in right at number 9, actually in front of their brother and of Western Kentucky, who ended up leaving. Uh, One that surprised me was Western Illinois. I
Yeah.
was not expecting Western Illinois to be able to just crack in the all-time top 25 list, which just goes to show some of these programs have history that you kind of forget about. And then you do see the programs like South Dakota State that haven't been here that long that are able to get up to my 19 spot. So for those of you guys listening in podcast form, I'll go through these real quick. Number 1, North Dakota State. Number 2, Georgia Southern. Number 3, Montana. Number 4, App State. Number 5 is Youngstown State. Those are your blue bloods, as I'm gonna coin them at least. 6 is Northern Iowa. 7 is James Madison. 8 is Delaware. 9 is Eastern Kentucky. 10 is the Eastern Washington Eagles. 11 is Sam Houston State. 12 is Furman. 13 is Marshall. 14 Villanova. 15 New Hampshire. 16 Montana State. 17 is Richmond. 18 McNeese. 19 South Dakota State. 20 Western Kentucky. 21 the Idaho Vandals. 22 William and Mary. 23 Eastern Illinois. 24 Nevada. And 25 Western Illinois Leathernecks. Is there anybody in the all-time list that surprises you?
It's probably because I haven't, I feel like it's been a long time since they've been, FCS. Marshall, I'm glad you pointed them out. I kind of forgot how good they did, they were at the FCS level. And also McNeese. I feel like McNeese is that similar team to, possibly even a Youngstown, where like McNeese has had some really good teams, but they kind of get overlooked now because they haven't had the strongest recent success in the Southland, and also the Southland isn't looked at as I would say a premier FCS conference. So I think Marshall and McNeese were a little bit surprising for me, but thinking about it now, they make sense to be in there. And also Eastern Illinois as well. Haven't had a lot of big success. They're starting a new I would say era coming up with the first year head coach, but I think them sliding in at 23 is a little bit surprising as well, just because if you have any newer FCS fans, they probably won't look at that program as one that would be top 25 all time.
Yeah, I know my personal surprise, and maybe it's just being an Idaho Vandal fan. I did not actually expect Idaho to make this list. I did think they would make the current FCS list just because
Yeah.
while we were gone, teams like App State ran the show, Georgia Southern. Like you had these teams that had huge runs. Montana's run basically started once Idaho left. And I was like, and even that when Idaho was good in the 80s and early 90s, they didn't ever win a title. They were that perennial, last one at the ball who didn't make a title. And I was like, I think that's going to hurt us. I think we missed, 15-ish years of wins. So I was shocked to see us make the list with some of the all-time greats, and even have finished ahead of teams like Nevada, who left at the same time as us. But I guess that some of that's being back now. And then seeing teams that have been there the whole time that I thought would be a lot higher. Like I'm shocked to see Montana State only at 16, but I
Yeah.
guess you do forget they had that period in the 90s where Montana was doing great, and they kind of, I'm not gonna say struggled, but really didn't do anything to brag home about there in the 90s, early 2000s, other than being on the wrong side of the streak. So I thought Montana State might make that like if you would have asked me before this, I would have said guarantee they're top 15. Seeing them at the 16 spot all time was a little bit of a shocker for me. But next, we're going to get into kind of the current blue blood. So these are teams that are still in the FCS. So, this is with App State gone. This is with Georgia Southern gone, Marshall gone. These teams that we talked about. And I think what's great is in my list, I still included James Madison, Jacksonville State, in Sam Houston because they were in my rankings, and I just figured they're still currently FCS. I mean, I know now they're not, but when I was doing this at the end of last season, I still had that in my head that they weren't gone or leaving yet. And you actually did it where you didn't include them because they are transitioning to the FBS, which I think is a great point to kind of bring in with a little bit of what happens to the FCS. We just covered the all times. I think this is a good time to kind of reflect on we are losing James Madison, who isn't an all-time blue blood, but I think we would assume maybe makes it here in the current list. How does our league bounce back? Because if you do look at basically what we both said in the all-time list, you have 3 of those programs that are gone, 2 of them. 2 of those programs that are gone. The all-times, basically you're de facto easily number 2, almost number 1. And then you're number 4, who, I mean, honestly, without Montana, if Montana left at the same time App State does, I think App State's probably ahead of Montana in the all-time list. I think Montana has benefited from still getting playoff appearances and all the stuff. I think if you cut everybody off when they left, you're looking at your number 2 and number 3 programs all time in Georgia Southern and App State leaving. And with that, we were able to have the birth of a James Madison. Eastern Washington has really taken a role in recently. Sam Houston State is officially becoming one of the flirting blue bloods of this conference until they bounced. But what's your opinion on, how the FCS can reload with the loss of James Madison, Sam Houston, 2 of the most recent winners that aren't North Dakota State? Can they bounce back?
I mean, I think they can. I think it's been shown over time that they can. They've lost some big teams. You mentioned Georgia Southern left, Appalachian State left. Now Sam Houston, James Madison are leaving, but there's still some really good teams left. I think when you look at out of my blue bloods, North Dakota State and Youngstown State are still here. We don't know what Youngstown State's going to look like over these next few seasons. There's some promising things coming out of that program, so maybe they can get back into the playoffs and start adding to their resume. But when I look at the candidates for me to potentially be some new blue bloods, we got some really good programs. I think Delaware right now, they're reloading. They got a new coach finally. That team was kind of beat up last season at times, and I think they're primed. If Delaware wins that spring championship, are we looking at them differently though? That's my question. If they somehow come out of that semifinal, get to the championship, and they win that spring championship, they're sitting at 3 FCS national titles, and they got one of the biggest budgets in FCS. There's no sign that they're going to turn back. So I think
the leader of their conference leaving. So it's
exactly,
they just seem to be heir apparent to James Madison. It would almost seem like that was the transferring of power. And I think to your point real quick, you nailed it, because look how much different Sam Houston gets viewed now just by winning 1 title. I mean, for years they were that team that choked, and they win 1 title. And now you almost feel like you have to include them in such a conversation. And that 1 title did move them from probably the 20s into the low teens of the all-time list. So I 100% think you're right. Winning a title does a lot for a program.
And I think North Dakota State's dominance has hurt the perception that the FCS isn't as deep as it is too, because it's really, you've had a lot of teams, and I think you can speak to this, that got to the national championship and just haven't running into like what would Jacksonville State look like if they go and beat North Dakota State in Frisco? What would some of these other what would a Montana State be sitting at right now if they pull it out last year? Tommy Milo doesn't get hurt. I don't know, but North Dakota State's hurt the perception. But when I look, what happens, Eastern Kentucky, Furman, some of these programs, they haven't won a national championship in a really long time. What happens if they make another run and start piling up those playoff wins? They get hot again because we've seen some of these blue blood programs get hot, tailor off, then they get hot again. Some of these programs haven't just won like North Dakota State over a 12-year period. They've won 4, 5, 6 years, had some few years where they didn't make a big run, then they would come back and get another big run. You look at a Montana, it's kind of spread out 95 and like I believe it was 01 or 02, they go and win one. So I think the FCS is fine. The biggest thing for the FCS, and I talked to Sam Herder about this, is trying to keep some of those up and coming FCS teams in house, because the problem when you look at some of the newer names that wouldn't even be in this conversation because they just joined, but you look at a Tarleton State, a Kennesaw State, some of those newer FCS teams, they've been extremely vocal, and a lot of their moves have spoke that they're looking to go FBS sooner rather than later. So what happens if those programs start competing at a high level? The Stephen F. Austins, they start getting really hot, but then they dip before they're able to put up a resume like a Youngstown, like a Georgia Southern, like an Appalachian State. That's, to me, is the bigger concern, because I think there's a lot of teams right now in the FCS that have a lot of potential. I don't think Eastern Kentucky's very far away from competing again for playoff spots. Last year, they were 7-4. We're on the bubble. And this year, there's a good argument that they're the second best team in the ASUN, right there behind Kennesaw State. If they get into the playoffs and make some noise, they get to the semifinals, they get to the quarterfinals. I think Eastern Kentucky is a team. Eastern Washington's still a younger team in the FCS level that has a lot of, I would say, potential, because I don't foresee Eastern Washington making the move anytime soon to FBS. And so that could be a team you look at. I think some of even the SWAC teams that I would think you could consider their conference dominance and Celebration Bowl dominance, like a Grambling State, a FAMU, possibly even a Jackson State. Now, I think some of those teams, if we saw the SWAC put FAMU in the playoffs, they just got to start winning playoff games, and those teams can enter the argument as well. So there's a lot of great candidates, man. I'm not super concerned about it, but now the problem would be with realignment, like me and Sam talked about. What if that line between Group of Five and FCS kind of gets blurred, and then you kind of got this weird mix, and you have a mass like a real max exodus of like 20 programs somehow get up and move or get reclassified? That would be more of a death blow to the FCS. But I think right now where we're sitting, I don't think it's time to hit the panic button just yet.
Which, if you're interested in that exact subject, title card video we just did about what happens if we do a G5 FCS merger. And we basically said about 17 to 20 programs probably are the ones that leave. So you're right with that. I think something you hit on, which I don't think I touched very much when we're talking like what is the blue blood. I think that the fact that you do have it over a long period of time is very important. I mean, you look at Alabama. Part of the reason people are saying, like, no ifs, ands, buts about it, they're one of the best program probably of all time, even though they're basically tied with Notre Dame in titles. Is Notre Dame's titles, yes, they've had appearances, which is why they're probably considered number 2 all time throughout multiple decades. But one of the guys I was listening to says, you have to be relevant in 3 different basically generation classes. And in that case, you have the Bear Bryant years where Alabama was the best program. You have the Nick Saban years where they're the best program. And it's when a team like Clemson, a team like maybe Florida State doesn't get that love, because Clemson's doing it really, really good now with Dabo Swinney. I know they won one back once in the 80s, but it's like you look at Florida State. They did with Bobby Bowden, and they did do it with Jimbo, and then it kind of fell off a cliff. I think you look at, like, can you be relevant for 20, 30 years, or not even that, but in pockets, kind of like we touched on, like Georgia Southern kind of won theirs in spurts, almost like the Bulls. Like they'd win like 3, have a break for a minute, and then win like 3 more. Unlike North Dakota State, this basically just rattle off all of them in a row. I think that does do something to prove how good you are. Like Montana winning one in the 90s, winning one in the 2000s, looking like they might be able to get one here in the 2020s. We'll see. Obviously, we've got a handful of more seasons before we can close out the 2020s. But they seem to be on the right track to get back to that. But even something for them is how many of those have been with Bobby Houck? Like, is that something that's going to punish him, even though he's back for a second stint? Um,
It
Either way, I
definitely
think
could.
there's, yeah, and that's where I said like the Eastern thing is like, it, Eastern is like the best example, I think, because they have won the national title. They have had appearances in the national title. They have made a ton of semifinals. They are one of probably the most recognizable national brands at the FCS level due to the red field. Obviously, now the success that like guys like Cooper Kupp are having, uh, Vernon Adams kind of being that first major FCS to FBS as a senior kind of move going to Oregon. Like, they've done a lot of things to make them be a top of mind school, but that doesn't necessarily make them a blue blood because all their successes come in 12 to 13 years. And even with that, they only have one title win to speak for it. So I do think there's like, let's say they do fall off here. And in another 6-7 years, they pick up and they win two more. Then, like you said, that's a whole different conversation, or even win one more. It's just like, okay, so they won one. They went to one with Aaron Best. They won one with I can't space on his name right now, but Cal Poly's current coach, Bo Baldwin. And then, they win one with, I don't know, somebody comes back and coaches there. Maybe it's Roos or so, whatever. Like, then you're saying like you've had three coaches be able to get to the top of that mountain. That elevates you. I think that's something that's important when you're considering like who these new teams could be. Because I do think, like we talked about, some of the teams have left in the current or from the all-time list. And I think from my current compared to your current, there are going to be a couple more teams that are leaving, which opens the door for some of these teams to make that move. And you do have some of these teams that are already on that list. Like you mentioned, like in Eastern Kentucky could make that jump. Depending on what happens with Stephen F. Austin, like, can they fill in the shoes of Sam Houston? You're looking at the HBCUs. We don't know what Jackson State's plans are. We don't know what I did include Celebration Bowls in my stuff, so people know that you did get points for that. I'm just the controversial part is I did not rate it as high as a national title because you only have to beat one team to get there instead of a 2014 playoff. But it is something I ranked, and that's why you do get a couple of HBCUs that will be making this list. Obviously, Florida A&M being one because they've been there and won it, and Prairie View's had great seasons too back when they were competing, and so there are some of those teams. I'm wondering the Ivies, like there are programs that have made this jump and have, but who's going to make the next jump? I guess maybe we'll talk about after we break down our current blue bloods. I want to know kind of like, all right, your top 5 programs that could be that when we do this again in 10 years, who in the 10 years has done enough to jump into at least maybe not permanently blue blood, but being viewed as kind of that top 5 program in the FCS. We're going to start with my list just because my list, I accidentally was dumb and included James Madison and Sam Houston and Jacksonville State. So our current FCS blue bloods, the change here is UNI makes it into the blue blood list. Jacksonville or Youngstown State moves up from 5 to 3. Montana moves from 3 to 2. And then James Madison cracks in at the 5th spot for me, being considered one of the blue bloods of the FCS. After that, obviously North Dakota State's the number 1. Number 6, you have Delaware. So I think what you said, a team that's really knocking on that door and what one title could do. If they get that one title, they're probably actually ahead of James Madison all time in terms of being a blue blood program. Eastern Kentucky at 7, Eastern Washington at 8. You got Sam Houston at 9, Furman at 10, Villanova at 11, 12, you have New Hampshire, 13, you have Montana State, 14, you have Richmond, 15, you have McNeese, 16, you have South Dakota State, 17, you have Idaho, 18, you have William and Mary, 19, you have Eastern Illinois, 20, you have Western Illinois, the Leathernecks, and this is kind of where you get that new 5. We lost 5. Here's kind of your new 5 that crack into the current top 25 programs of the FCS, flirting with blue blood potential. You have Florida A&M, you have Wofford, you have Southern Illinois, you have Jackson State, and you have Jacksonville State, which I thought was funny. Those two went 24-25. And just for Clarence, if I was to remove those 3 schools, you're looking at Colgate, Lehigh, and Weber State rounding out those last spots, just edging out Illinois State. So anybody in my top 25 that shocks you or makes sense?
I mean, I feel like everyone here probably makes sense. I'm actually a little bit surprised. I guess it's because they haven't had this sustained success, but I felt like Jacksonville State might have been a little bit higher, man. They had some really, really good teams in the late 2010s area. I thought Jacksonville State might have done enough to be a little bit higher, but I think now with them leaving, it probably doesn't make too big of a difference. I think FAMU is one earlier that I was probably surprised all time they didn't crack like the very back end of it, but they're in this one. And then for me, I think it's all the ones I mentioned earlier that are like on that cusp: Delaware, Eastern Kentucky, Eastern Washington, Furman. I think those programs, man, if when you look back through their history, man, there's probably a game or two that if it goes the other way, they have a really,
Mm-hmm.
really good argument to be in that blue blood tier.
Yeah. And like so that translates to the FBS level too. What if Notre Dame beats Alabama in the BCS title game? What if they do at least play in the title game here in the college football playoff? Are they now viewed all time better than Alabama? But they haven't, and so that's why Alabama's higher. And just to kind of put exactly what you said in perspective, if you are looking at basically those teams I just listed all the way down to Illinois State, Florida A&M through Illinois State are all separated by 9.5 points in my scale. So they're
Oh
all
wow.
they're all real tight. So what you were saying, like if Jacksonville State maybe makes the final one more time, they could jump all the way up to maybe 20 or 19, right? It's like that's how close kind of it really drops off at about the 11 spot. Eastern Washington is kind of the separator from everybody else. Everybody else is, like you said, they're kind of like Sam Houston. They got the one title. Villanova title. McNeese has been good. Montana State won one back in the day, made one recently. And it's like you kind of all these guys who kind of have their one off. South Dakota State making a title. But it's like you look at Eastern, that's kind of the cutoff of won a title and have been consistently good, at least for a decade plus. And so a lot of that drops off. A win for Jacksonville State easily could have, thrown them right up there into the possibly even the top 10 had they won that title against North Dakota State. So it is, if you're seeing your program on my list real low, part of it is, they could have been better. They just didn't take care of their business at the time. With that, I kind of want to know maybe some of the schools you think are probably a top 25 program at the moment. And then, give us your 1 through 5 or one through however, who are the current blue bloods of the FCS?
I kind of I spoiled it a little bit earlier. I'm extremely strict. I think there's only three current blue bloods right now in the FCS. Northern Iowa. I don't hate that pick, but for me, one of my criteria is you have to win a national title, and they haven't done that. They came very very close, and
Can
they've
I
made some
can
great
I
playoff runs.
can I guess your
Go
top
ahead.
three when you before
Go go
North
ahead.
Dakota
Go ahead.
State,
Yep.
Montana, Youngstown
Yep.
State?
Yep,
Yeah,
those are
that
the
makes
3. I mean, they got multiple 4 for Youngstown, 9, of course, for North Dakota State, 2 national championships for Montana. They got 16 Big Sky titles since they moved to the FCS ranks. I mean, they're right there. North Dakota State doesn't have the number of conference championships just because they haven't been there for the longevity, but when you win 9 national championships out of the past 11 years, I can't make an argument that you don't belong at that top spot. And Youngstown, I mean, they haven't actually won a lot of conference titles. That's the one thing, that's the one reason
mhm.
I have them at 3 is because they've only won 5 FCS conference championships. That's a
Yeah.
very, very low number, but they saved themselves with the 4 national titles. I mean, I think once you hit over 3, you're kind of right. You're at that cusp to be a blue blood program over the time they did it. I think though, if I had to include a 4, and I think they're even a little bit above Northern Iowa for me, and I know that's probably going to be controversial, is Delaware because they've won those 2 FCS national titles. They have double digit conference championships as well. But the problem with Delaware is they haven't done it consistently over. I feel like they're
Mhm.
not consistent enough. They have like 2-year spurts rather than like a string of like dominant runs that a lot of these blue blood programs have. And that's kind of so I would have Northern Iowa and Delaware sitting just outside. Then you got the Eastern Kentucky's, Eastern Washington's, Furman's. I think Montana State as well is up there. The problem with Montana State is I think you agree is they haven't won a title since the 80s. It's
Mhm.
been so long, and I think
And had
last year,
bad periods between there
yes, they had some lows of lows
because they
in
could have been
terms of that.
like Youngstown or you and I, like a great example of like, okay, maybe you and I hasn't won one, right? But it's like but they've been a consistent playoff team, which is what
Yeah.
gets them in that. Where like if you're making the FCS is almost 50 years old or whatever, he's like when you've made 40 playoff appearances, like it's going to get you a little bit higher up. But when you're Montana State and you win a title, and then you go like a 6-year spurt, barely make it in the playoffs, 6-year spurt, barely making the playoffs, and then now things seem to be ramping up. They seem to be really solidifying themselves as a top program currently. And if they keep that up, they'll quickly rise up this list because, as we said, there is a little bit of the haves and have-nots even in this ranking where we're talking about like there's only 3 teams that have, or I guess 4 that have multiple national titles, I believe, on this. There are 5, but it's a handful of teams that have multiple national titles. So you win one, and that immediately moves you up this list, and it's something we just keep hitting on. Like a couple of these teams, Delaware.
And there's a few. I think Grambling probably be my top 25 too, just because of the pure dominance, man, that they had back, back throughout like even back in like 60s, 70s, 80s. I mean, they had some really strong teams, and then even the Devontae Kincaid era where they're still the only SWAC team to win a Celebration Bowl as well too. So that to me puts them a little high. I mean, they dominated back in the day in the SWAC, and they were the team to beat. So I think you could probably put them, I would probably have them about 24, 25, right about there with Jackson State potentially. I think Jackson State has had a little bit more recent success, but also they had some lows too. That's the problem with Grambling and Jackson State is they've had dominant runs, but like you said, with Montana State, there's been seasons where they would win 3, 2, 4 wins a year, and it's like that's not getting you any points. FAMU, I feel like would be a little bit higher if they didn't make that failed attempt to jump to FBS. I feel like right when they were getting things rolling and could potentially at that time, not opt out of the FCS playoffs, they could have made multiple more runs throughout that program's peak era, but they made that jump to FBS. It didn't work out, and I feel like that really hurt them. But the reason I would have them probably in my top 20 is that 90s run, the late 90s. They made a strong run to the semifinals. They had multiple playoff appearances, and now you're looking at what Willie Simmons is doing with that program. And if they that appearance against Southeastern Louisiana really hurt them, I feel like, in a lot of outside FCS eyes. But I wouldn't be surprised. I don't see Jackson State surrendering the SWAC. If FAMU has a 9-2 record, losses to North Carolina, a Power 5 team, and Jackson State, I don't see how they don't get a large bid this year. And if they can string together some wins over these next few seasons, potentially, possibly get a Celebration Bowl win, because I know that counts in terms of everything, FAMU could be right there as well. So I like FAMU as well, but I think Grambling would be the one team on your list or the one team that didn't appear on your list that I probably would slide into that 25 spot.
Yeah, Grambling for me is 32, so they're right behind South Carolina State and Maine.
Oh yeah,
so they're getting
South
close.
Carolina State has a chance too, man. If they go and beat Jackson State back-to-back years in the Celebration Bowl, that's gonna, and they're primed to dominate the MEAC. And I know what the perception of the MEAC is among FCS analysts and things, but Buddy Pugh has done an excellent job with that program with the limited resources that he has.
Yeah. So then, just to have fun here at the end, the worst current program is also the worst all-time program. So even though they have more potential to have more wins, all that fun stuff, there is a easy candidate for the bottom. Can you guess who historically and currently is the worst FCS program of all time? I actually would not have guessed this, to be fair.
I'm trying to think. I'm racking my brain throughout the conferences.
Yeah, comment down below who you guys think it is. Pause the video and replay it. I want to know, like you said, we need your guys' current and all-time Blue Bloods. And then I need you to guess who the worst program is too. So comment down below.
I'm like scared. I'm scared to guess. If I guess the wrong program, those fans are going to be like, "Oh, really? That?"
I know this is a dangerous question. I'll give you who my guess was when I was scrolling down, and then I'll tell you who it actually is.
Oh man, I'm racking my brain. I do not want to guess the wrong program here. I feel like it has to be. What was your guess? I'm very curious on your guess here.
So I was going in my thought process, my head, right? I'm thinking newer team because they don't have the time to build all that stuff. Or like Yeah, if you're like I don't know, Gardner Webb, right? Like you've had
Yeah.
time to rack up wins and get those playoff appearances. So I was going with a more new team. So I was thinking it was Northern Colorado, which Bears fans
Not
already know I don't mind Northern Colorado, so I should be okay getting away with saying I
I
thought they
really
were the
like
worst.
I really like this program, and I have good connections with the players and the coaches on this team, but I have a feeling it's them because they were not good. They just switched conferences. They haven't been good for a long. They're primed to be good this year, but oh man, I want to say it's like Campbell or something.
See, I think they've been too good recently, and that has
That's what,
helped
yeah,
them.
that's what I'm worried because
It's
like they were not good in the Pioneer, like they were atrocious in the
yeah,
Pioneer League.
it was. I'll go the all-time worst programs, and then you tell me if any of these shock you. Um, Let me get up to five. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
All
Okay,
right,
so we
can you give me a conference? Let me get what's the conference of this worst team? Like I feel like
let me just double check because if I get this wrong, then
I don't
I'm
want to
uh I
with conference realignment. I don't blame you. I'd have to double check everything.
right. They are Patriot League. That's I was gonna
Oh,
probably
Patriot
guess.
League. Mm. That doesn't surprise me though. That makes sense. Like now that you say it, but I still go ahead. Yeah, what's the final top?
Colors are blue and orange.
Blue and orange. Man, I got to get up on my Patriot League teams.
Bucknell.
Oh wow, fuck now. Yeah, I would have never guessed that.
your I guess your wooden spoon leaders are Bucknell is number one. Jacksonville is number two, which I
Ooh, okay.
thinking back, I should have thought that they even folded the
Yeah,
program. They were that bad, right? So Gardner Webb,
yeah.
USF all time, and then Northern Colorado.
I would have
So
never guessed USF.
yeah, I guess they
I
must have
don't
just
even
been
remember.
terrible.
I don't even remember their time really at the FCS. They
It,
probably were that bad that I was like,
and
I
I'm
mean,
almost wondering if it was just a handful of seasons, almost like
because they
you
haven't
know what,
been that.
what a UTSA did almost, where like
Because they
they were
haven't been
there.
bad at the FBS level. Like they were a ranked team
Yeah.
just a few years ago. Like that team's been decent at the in the
How long?
AAC.
How long were they in the? And I think they might have been one of those weird teams that was like transitioning. It was so
Yeah.
hard going through to give people perspective. There have been, uh, golly, 177 teams I basically had to go through to do this thing.
Oh
Oh no,
wow.
sorry, I take that back. This might be wrong because I remember I dropped out teams that didn't even earn a single point.
Oh.
So Bucknell is saving grace for Bucknell fans out there. You might be the worst team that at least registered onto recording a point. So there are teams I think that are worse than Bucknell. Now that I'm like going back, like I did this in January. I'm pretty sure teams that didn't even earn a point, so like zero playoff appearances, zero.
Oh yeah.
I just dropped them. So
I
Bucknell is the
apologize to
worst.
Campbell
Yeah,
officially.
Bucknell is the worst team that has done something.
You're the worst team that's achieved anything. The trophy
Yeah.
case isn't completely bare.
Congratulations to the Bison. You could be worse, but you are the worst of the best. Uh, with that, Zach, I want to thank you for coming on the show. It was fun talking about it and kind of covering, like we mentioned, a topic that I'm shocked nobody else has thought of. So I'm glad I got you on, especially with the Blue Bloods in your name. But with that, why don't you kind of give people a brief summary, kind of about yourself, how they can find you, and what the Blue Bloods is.
Yeah, we're trying to kind of establish ourselves as one of the top FCS sources out there, man. You can find us at thebluebloodspod.com, on YouTube, The Blue Bloods, where we really started as just a podcast. And we've kind of shifted more to the website side. You can find our podcast on all podcast streaming platforms, Twitter at _Blue Bloods, Instagram the same thing. We got a Facebook group, just the Blue Bloods, have our logo on that. You can find me at Zach McKinnell, like below, and man, I just appreciate you having me, man. This was a blast, and like I told you before, when you texted me the topic, I knew I was immediately in, man. So shout out to you for that and all the research you did for this episode.
Yeah, it was one of those things where it felt like fate that I had such a hard time getting it going at the end of the season. And then middle of the season, I'm like, I'll just pencil that till the end, till the preview time. And then sure enough, like it hit me. I'm like, how did I not think of that ahead of time? So I'll say it's fate. Hopefully we have some teams here that crawl in and make more, because we need more than 3 blue bloods at the FCS level. So if you're
I
one of
agree.
those teams, if you're a Delaware, if you're in Eastern Kentucky, if you're in Eastern Washington, like Furman, even, like, let's make some moves, guys. Take down the Bison. They can afford to let a couple other people join them in this blue blood conversation. But I want to thank
I
everybody
got
for
a
tuning. Yo, go ahead. Go ahead.
I got a feeling people in Fargo don't like that.
No,
I saw how they reacted to my guy Sam predicting 3 straight losses against SDSU. I don't think they're taking any losses in Frisco, man. That's their spot.
here's the thing. They're not going to like it, but they're still going to interact with it, which is always the
That's a
pro of like
fact.
insulting North Dakota State on a show, is they come out and force to tell you how wrong you are, and then you just watch the view counter
Listen,
tick up.
the Montana. Okay, so I learned my lessons quick. This was the first year we kind of made predictions for the playoffs, and in the second and third round, I picked against both Montana and Montana State, and I'm talking about I was not ready. I did not think that many people cared, and my DMs and the comments went berserk. And when they both won too, they came full force for me, and I had to apologize. So I had to eat my crow on that one.
But your interaction numbers were up. That's where you
That's a fact.
go to potential sponsors and you go, look at how much engagement we're getting. Anyways, thank you guys for tuning in to the episode of the FCS, aka the Football Chris Show, because my name fits conveniently in the middle. Help out the FCS Fans Nation Network, you guys. Hit it with the subscribe button. Give it a like and all that fun stuff. We're really trying to grow this thing for you. We got so many shows on this network, so give it a sub, and then also check out the Blue Bloods, of course. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Hey, thank you guys so much for making it to the end of this video. Us here at FCS Fans Nation Network are pushing 1,000 subscribers on the YouTube page. We really want to get there. If you've made it this far, you might as well hit the subscribe button in the middle of the screen or down below. We would really appreciate it. And while you're at it, there's a couple other videos up on the screen. Might as well give them a listen too. You don't know who else on the network you'll like.